So we're shifting now from healing from the outside to healing from the inside out. And it's an alternative perspective on both mental and physical health. And it focuses on optimizing internal neural regulation and understanding how internal states mediates the triggering impact of external factors, but not in remediating the assumed causes of the triggers. So, in fact, this becomes like Deb Dana's major, I would say, important contribution in terms of psychotherapy is really to say narrative or story follows state. And that's what this is saying. Our physiological state creates the platform for our experience. So if that's true, what's our goal? To move the physiological state into a more homeostatic regulatory state where the emergent properties of that state are now to be more welcoming, more connected, more interactive. So polyvagal informed strategies focus on signaling the nervous system to support homeostatic functions. And what are homeostatic functions? In general, they used to be called health, growth, and restoration, and I added sociality, because when our physiology is safer, we're emergent and spontaneously social. But the other important part is sociality is both a product of being in a state of homeostasis, but sociality also is a trigger to support homeostasis. So there's a circularity in that. But what this model gets you into is not focusing on the historical events of the trauma or disruption, getting you away from focusing on event and emphasizing more on state and responses being driven by state. So ANS is our intervening variable. Principle number one. And the traffic light analogy where the three colors represent different autonomic states. Green is our ventral vagus, our calm physiology, our well-regulated one. Yellow is our sympathetic nervous system that supports mobilization, and under fear, it's fight-flight. And red being our subdiaphragmatic dorsal vagus that when under threat, shuts us down, but when not under threat, supports moments of intimacy and supports visceral homeostasis. So these neurophysiologically based domains of hypotheses for the autonomic nervous system are linked on the ANS as the intervening variable. Polyvagal theory is focused on autonomic state as being the organismic state in between the stimulus and the response, and not the stimulus. What this means is the organismic state, and this is an old learning principle that actually was presented in the 1920s as a way of explaining why SR didn't always work. And they were using not physiological measurements of the organism, but historical information. And we are actually going back to more of that with our questionnaires like on adversity history. And we're finding out, of course, that people with adversity histories have atypical reactions or, say, more clinical symptoms. But what we'll explain in a few minutes is that not only does the history tell you something, but if the history resulted in a retuned autonomic nervous system, and where the nervous system now is in a state of threat, then you have your answer. So it's not the history, it's the history changing or retuning that physiological states. So the theory enables us to develop predictions about biobehavioral reactivity from the autonomic state. So it leads to a different class of assessments. And these assessments, and many therapists, especially in this room, will view themselves as polyvagal informed. And what does that mean? They look at their patients, they look at their clients. They assess their autonomic state. How? Through voice, facial expressivity. They witness, they listen, and they understand the physiological state they're in. They're not putting electrodes on, or I don't think many are. They're not, taking blood tests or saliva tests. They're basically saying, functionally, your voice is telling me a lot. Functionally, the way you look at me tells me a lot. And we know this because intuitively our body reacts. In a way, our body becomes a polygraph, a physiological monitoring system of the other's behavior. We react to it, and we need to be aware of our reactions. So polyvagal theory leads to predictions of biobehavioral reactivity from those states. So when a person's voice is monotonic with a high pitch, we instantaneously know the person's a little bit on the anxious side and that they're really going to be easily triggered. So what do? We talk slower, we listen, we slow up the pace. That's being polyvagal informed. We don't yell at them and say, get a hold of yourself, be an adult. What do you think you're doing? You're in a room with another. We have our lines and we know they don't work because we tried them with our spouses and we've tried it with our children. We know it doesn't work, but do we keep using them? That's our narrative. We need to, in a sense, be a better witness and a witness of ourselves. So polyvagal theory leads to strategies of intervention targeted at changing autonomic state and optimizing outcomes. So if you can change the state, then the playground, the platform for your therapy is enhanced. In a sense, the client becomes a partner on a shared journey of becoming healthy. Now, interestingly, about 15 years ago, I interviewed for a major administrative position at the National Institutes of Health. And I told the director of all the institutes that when I was in for my interview, I said, we know too much about human physiology to allow medicine to be practiced the way it is. I said, we need to recruit the patient's nervous system as a collaborator on a shared journey of health, towards health. He didn't have a clue of what I was saying. I didn't get the job, and it's an interesting story. But it taught me not to expect what I would view as obvious insights from those who are in the trenches. That they are really brought up with certain models, those models are powerful to them, and they have great difficulty leaving them outside the door and listening to other things. Okay, so we're going to be seeing this slide frequently today, and you're going to see it again tomorrow when I do the polyvagal music with Anthony Gorey. Think of the control center as being in our brainstem, and this is now regulating homeostasis. So you have the vagus, which has a sensory branch. It really has 80% of its fibers are sensory. It's going through all our organs. Think of the vagus not as a motor system like we talk so much about it in polyvagal theory, but as a surveillance system monitoring all the organs of your body and sending that information to this control center. And then through the efferent pathways of ventral and dorsal vagus and also sympathetics, it's now going to those target organs. And they're going to basically move our autonomic state. And if it moves it too much in one direction, the sensory system goes back to the brainstem through the receptor limb and says, retract some of that influence. And so you have this dynamic adjustment going on. So we can think about this as signaling ANS state. We're signaling it to the brainstem. What is the state you're in? And if you're in certain states and you have certain demands, you want more mobilization, but if you're in others, you want the homeostatic function to come back in. And we can see that a vagal nerve stimulator is really doing that. So what is a vagal nerve stimulator? Most people think you're stimulating the vagus. Well, yes, you are. But what part of the vagus? You're stimulating the sensory branch of the vagus. So how does that affect your organs? It doesn't. It's not going to. If it affects your organs, you have too much current in the vagal nerve stimulator. You're over, and then you'll end up with the old ones where they implant it. If you put too much current in, you'll get diarrhea. You'll get too much. And actually, you'll get impotency for males. So it's tuned back just to affect the sensory ones. And really, it's sending the signal to the brainstem. It's saying to the brainstem that we're getting information from the organs, and the organs are sending this information up, and all things are go. So now the efferent limb matches all systems go. So now you get back into a more homeostatic level. And so, in a way, that is how it works. So you can signal safety not solely through the vagal nerve stimulator, but you can signal it through like the acoustic stimulation of safe and sound protocol, but you can stimulate it through your co-regulatory features of social engagement. Face, voice, engagement. That's going to that central control soul system as signals of safety that now will enable vagal calming to occur to our nervous system. Think about the crying baby and how the mother calms the baby. The mother's voice, if she's good, is going to act like a very potent vagal nerve stimulator. If she has an irritable, fussy baby, she'll learn that that doesn't work so well. So that's a degree of atypicality. And then we had one of each, children. And so we have an understanding of what's going on within that realm. So we start getting, even in our home, we got a great appreciation of the individual differences of that organismic state. So the metaphor that we want to take with us is that of a stealth neuromodulation, something that comes in outside or under our conscious intentionality. Because if we make it too intentional, we'll mess it up. We'll start overthinking it. We'll start thinking that we control it. And when our body doesn't respond to our intentions, what will we do? We'll get angry at our bodies. And many people, including many who have experienced trauma, are furious at their bodies because their bodies stop listening to them. Because their body says, I don't trust what that guy is trying to make me do. And rightfully so. And what has happened is that those who have experienced trauma have a nervous system that is reluctant to relinquish its defenses. It doesn't trust the intentionality branch. So how are you going to change it? You're going to use stealth neuromodulation. Intonation, calm the baby, calm the puppy, calm the kitten. So we're going to signal our nervous system that it has permission to recover and optimize its homeostatic functions. Homeostatic function is projected in our own body in very slow rhythmic neural signals. It can be seen in heart rate variability, multiple rhythms, but it can be seen in our gut. And interestingly, it can even be seen in the uterus. The uterus has the same rhythms of the gut, even if you're not pregnant, meaning that all our organs of our body have connections that create a rhythmic modulation, and that rhythmic modulation is the support of the homeostatic function. And all these rhythms get depressed when we are, quote, under stress, under threat, or disease. They're all the same, whether we're anxious or we have a pathogen. The nervous system reads a signal of threat and downregulates homeostatic functions. In general, it does this for a very important reason. Like if you have a pathogen, you can increase your body temperature if you downregulate your vagus. You get your sympathetic stuff, you have fever, it works. Acute reactions are extraordinarily adaptive, but chronic reactions can be pathology. And that's where the people are coming to you. They're locked into states, even things like long COVID. What is long COVID? Do you have a disease? Or did you win the war, kill the pathogen, but your nervous system didn't get the message, didn't learn that you won the war? So your job is, how do you signal the nervous system to inform it that it won the war? So all these disruptors, they can be psychological or they can be physiological. So another important take-home point is that mental health threats are as potent as injury, a physical threat. So the issue is our nervous system doesn't discriminate between mental illness and physical illness. So when people go to physicians where they have all these chronic symptoms, and the physician says, there's nothing wrong with you. Well, there's no pathophysiology in the end organ. The physician does not know anything about the neural regulation of that organ because they don't have those tools. So the pathophysiology is the endpoint of a neural regulation that has gone wrong. So the real future of medical health is the development of neural measures that really map what's going on in the theory. So the vagus is involved in these homeostatic rhythms. The theory does not focus on changing your response profile. It focuses on optimizing the autonomic state to remediate homeostatic disruptions. And in doing that, it promotes resiliency and flexibility, and many of those symptoms that you see disappear.